widely believed that Doom was the game that kickstarted the FPS genre, and it also showed what PC games were capable of in terms of technology and entertainment value. But there are a few games that id Software developed for the genre that preceded even Doom. Now, most people would be familiar with Wolfenstein 3D, but even fewer would know about the Catacomb 3D games that ran on an early version of the Wolfenstein engine and in a way was some of the first FPS games of all time. Catacomb 3D was the first one to be released in 1991, and it tells a simple story, where you're a wizard named Petton going into the catacombs to defeat an evil creature named Nemesis, using apparently the only spell you know, a magic missile. Visually, it's very similar looking to Wolfenstein, with basic textures for the wall, floor, and ceilings as you navigate the maze-like workings of the 20 levels until you reach the final boss. When you reach the 9th floor, it serves as a hub of sorts where you can move through 4 other different areas which each have scrolls you need to collect, one floor also having another portal you need to find to get to the last few floors in the game. You'll need to find keys to unlock doors, some of which are hidden behind destructible walls, and you can also collect treasure chests for extra points, and there's something enjoyable about the simplicity of everything. Controlling Petton can be done with either the mouse, keyboard, or a combination of both. Games from the 90s always use the control button to fire, which seems a little bit clunky nowadays, so the best bet is to use the directional buttons to move and the mouse to aim and fire. In terms of a shooting game, Catacomb 3D hasn't really aged all that badly, and you can see a lot of elements that carried across other shooting games as well. For instance, the way the player portrait changes to show the amount of damage you've taken, and also how you're able to collect health potions and other power-ups to use when needed most. The only issue is that killing enemies largely just involves clicking your mouse as fast as you possibly can. There's about 4 or 5 enemy types in the game, and the only difference between them is really their health points. Earlier enemies may only take 2 or 3 missiles or upwards of a dozen, and then when you get to the last few areas, there's these huge red demon looking guys that can honestly take about 50 hits each. What does that mean, I hear you asking? Well, it means you'll be clicking your mouse button several hundred times in the span of 2 or 3 minutes as you're fighting legions of the stronger monster types, who all eat up your magic missile spells like they're made out of toffee. You can get power-ups, one of which sends out a rapid-fire spread of magic missiles, and the other which shoots them out in an arc all around you, but they're not all that common, so expect your index finger to get a serious workout regardless. All up, I'd say Catacomb 3D is about an hour in length, maybe a little bit longer if you get stuck, which, let's face it, is bound to happen as some of the levels are confusingly complex, but overall it's really not that tough of a game. I do find myself getting a bit nauseated playing this game sometimes because it's not a truly 3D engine, so when you turn your character, the walls get somewhat warped as the engine tries to fake the effect or something, but I doubt most people would even notice this when playing anyway. What followed after Catacomb 3D was a trilogy of games developed by Softdisk that used the same name and similar mechanics, but felt a lot different in terms of design. And these games are Catacomb, Abyss, Armageddon, and Apocalypse. Yes, they all start with the letter A. Convenient. Catacomb Abyss was released in 1992, and it follows on from the events of the first game. After the defeat of Nemesis, you're heading into a mausoleum where some of the minions from the first game are residing, and it's believed Nemesis is soon to return also. Abyss largely controls the same as the first game, though the mouse does feel a bit clunkier, so using the keyboard primarily is a much easier option. You do have to manually turn around each corner as opposed to circle strafing, but the game is hardly difficult, so this isn't going to affect things too much anyway. Visually, there is a lot more detail in the textures, and particularly the heads-up display, which shows every single little tidbit of info you could possibly need to know. There's a much greater variety with the enemy types as well, even if it is just still a matter of clicking that attack button until your finger gets sore. This time, however, power-ups are in total abundance to the point that the difficulty becomes pretty much non-existent. Even if you're spamming the special attacks near constantly, you'll still be well stocked up thanks to the frequent chests that contain multiple items. To counter this, they've made it so these items can be destroyed if they're hit with one of your magic missiles, similar to how it is in the Gauntlet games. There's a little over a dozen levels in total, and they all again consist of mazes where you have to often destroy breakable walls to find hidden areas that contain the keys needed to unlock the exit. There's a lot more environments on offer than the first game, however. There's gardens, crypts, aqueducts, and some more hellish environments for the last few areas of the game. Throughout the game, you also come across these magical gems, 5 in total, though I don't know what the benefit is to collecting them, and they don't really seem to do anything, but hey, they sure do look nice twinkling in your heads-up display. Now, one thing I don't like about Abyss, and this is something that carries across to the other Softdisk games in the series, is that they rely heavily on this breakable walls mechanic. That being, you shoot a wall and it reveals an area behind it that you often need to explore to progress. Sometimes you're given a hint that a wall is breakable, often by having a different texture, but sometimes you're not given any hint at all. What this means is that you have to go around spamming your magic missiles, firing on every single surface when you end up getting stuck, because chances are you missed a single tile that opens up the next area. Overall, this feels more like an expansion pack than a full-blown sequel. The only real difference between this and Catacomb 3D is the slightly updated graphics and the new monsters you come up against. This trait carries across to Armageddon and Apocalypse as well, and they all roughly offer up the same amount of game time, roughly 1 or 2 hours max. Armageddon was the second game in the Softdisk trilogy, and by and large it is identical to Abyss, with a once again updated HUD and a few new monster designs. The plot again focuses around Nemesis being brought back to life, and you have to traverse 16 or so floors to stop him. Armageddon again relies heavily on this whole destructible walls mechanic for pretty much every single level in the game, which again can be a bit annoying when you're stuck and end up having to go back through the area firing on every single surface to find that one tile that you missed. Some of the new areas are actually pretty fun and interesting to play. However, there's one where you're in a creepy forest and these trees come to life and start chasing after you. Another one set in an ant colony that throws you against dozens of the little bastards as they hatch out of eggs right in front of you. And another where you're inside a demon prison, releasing monsters from their cells, only to kill them moments later. I think my favourite is the lair of the succubus. There really is nothing quite like the pixelated image of a naked demon girl. There is definitely a charm to DOS games from this era where artists had to be really creative to get something across visually, and this is a good example of that. Lastly, there's Catacomb Apocalypse, which is the most interesting out of the bunch. Again, the villain is Nemesis, and things start off as normal before throwing you into the future, into a hub-like area called the Axis of the Time Lords, where you have to get 4 keys from 4 different time periods to progress on to the next area. The enemies are cybernetic mages that hover mere inches off the ground, and you're also up against robotic wasps and floating eyeballs. It's real Doctor Who type stuff that's quite a departure from the medieval fantasy setting that the other games had. Apocalypse controls exactly the same as the previous 2 games. Again, expectedly, the heads-up display has been altered slightly, but the design of each level is practically identical. That being lots of key hunting and shooting down destructible walls in between killing legions of demonic assholes with your magic missiles. Apocalypse is also the most action-orientated, I'd say, as well, with a lot more enemy placements in levels, meaning you'll be in combat frequently. Levels also seem shorter, making this the most fast-paced out of the entire series. This is probably my favourite game out of the whole series, only because I find the setting to be a bit more interesting, and the return of a hub area gives the game more depth and makes it more interesting than just plodding from level to level. So the big question on everyone's lips is, are these games worth playing at all? Well, that's a good question, Sunny Jim, and there's not really a definitive answer. They're not quite like the influential titles that Wolfenstein 3D and Doom are. In a way, they're kind of like the aborted fetus before the prodigal son was born. But I would say they're worth playing if you're a fan of older shooting games. In fact, I'd surmise that most people who were gaming in the 90s have already played them anyway. They're short, easy, and colourful games that will give you a bit of a brief history tour through what FPS games were like before they devolved into the modern shooter shitfest we're now familiar with. The version sold on goodoldgames.com will give you all of the 4 original games, plus the original non-3D versions as well, which is damn good value.